Republican Congressman Rep.Issa of California, who sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Always great to see you, sir. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you, and thanks for covering in a fair way the president's sacrifice of his time to go thank the troops for what they do.
Yes, and not only sacrifice of his time, but this was a dangerous trip. And this is one, obviously, why, first of all, we were not, the Americans of this country, alerted to the fact that he was going over there. And then apparently he was supposed to have a couple meetings that could not happen, and in fact happened over phone instead because of the potential security risk. So that is something that he should get credit for.
Yeah, this was about the troops, not about a meeting with a foreign leader. So I'm glad the president prioritized the people he went to visit, which were those men and women in harm's way.
I want to ask you more about what it meant to the troops, because that is what this trip was supposed to be about, is reassuring those troops that are in Iraq. And I imagine a lot of them are wondering, you know, so we're still in Iraq. We understand that troops are going to be pulled out of Syria per the president's orders. But what do you believe this trip meant to the troops?
Well, having had the honor to go with the previously with the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Amos, for Christmas, I know what it's like to have somebody come in that's special to them. It wasn't the president, but if you're a Marine, the Commandant or Assistant Commandant's even bigger than a president. The reality, though, is the troops understood the president making two things: a commitment to them and a commitment to a country in which we are hosted. In other words, the country of Iraq wants us there. We've agreed to be there. And I think the important thing the president's making as a distinction is we are not hosted in Syria. We went in on a mission to get rid of ISIS. There is a sovereign country we object to, headed by a leader who we have terrible problems with. But if you're not going to go to war and take Bashar Assad out, why are you sitting in that country if you don't need to be? And I think that's one of the areas where many generals lost that focus, that we were in a country which we were not invited into. We were not taking out the government, nor, in fact, there at the behest of the government. It's a huge difference, and the president saw that, and he made a judgment call, and I think in the long run it might be the right one.
Government officials, particularly military officials, have come out and said this is a mistake. And number one, they believe by announcing that ISIS has been defeated is premature, because it's not completely defeated. There is a concern this could backfire and put our nation at risk. What do you think about that?
It could backfire, and if the president isn't willing to keep the promise, which I know he will keep, which is any resurgence and he'll be back in, and quite frankly, as somebody who's watched this for 18 years in Congress, if the president does what I strongly believe he would do, which is even a small resurgence would mean that our special operations people would go in. They wouldn't be boots on the ground, but they clearly would go in, do a mission, and leave. So there are a lot of tools the president has. I understand General Mattis, a man that I respect and have known for many years, had differences with the president. But I think the important issue here is it's not the same as President Obama keeping a campaign promise, leaving Iraq, leaving Afghanistan, and causing us to have to go back in because we stayed out until, in fact, a new terrorist organization had formed and grown. This is one of those where he's made a clear statement that he will go back at a drop of a hat if necessary. And I think that willingness makes a huge difference. And to the troops, the idea that when you go in, you have a mission. When the mission has been accomplished, you leave. That's the Colin Powell doctrine, if you will, that you don't go in without a mission, and you don't stay or extend beyond the mission that you stated.
Right. Well, meantime, President Trump is saying that the new acting defense secretary, Patrick Shanahan, could be there for a long time. And I'm going to want you to weigh on this in a second. Basically, he said that he's in no rush to nominate a permanent successor to General Mattis, who I know you are a big fan of. I want you to watch this.
Of course.
Everybody and his uncle wants that position. And also, by the way, everybody and her aunt. Just so I won't be criticized for that last statement. So we have a lot of people, we have a lot of great people who want to be Secretary of Defense. We'll take our time and we'll make the right decision.
So let me ask you first, I know that you're sad to see Mattis go. I know a lot of military officials, a lot of troops are very upset to see him go. He has 85% approval amongst our men and women who are fighting for our country. So what do you believe about his decision, and who might be a good successor to Mattis. It's hard to beat that kind of expertise.
Well, I certainly, probably not since MacArthur has somebody had sort of that populist support the way Mattis has. I will mention, though, that he didn't necessarily have it as he was coming in. Sometimes my Democratic friends only like someone when they're leaving. Patrick Shanahan is, in fact, very capable. And in addition to that, you have the chiefs of the various parts, the Army, the Navy, and so on. So the Department of Defense will continue operating and operating well. What I would say is the president is being realistic. The process of finding somebody, getting them through the vetting process, getting them through confirmation after Kavanaugh, I think he has to lower the expectations. It's going to be done quickly because nothing's being done quickly with the kind of obstruction that's gone on in the Senate for this president's entire 2 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Congressman Rep.Issa, great to see you. Happy holidays, sir.
Defense Secretary James Mattis, who is out the door in a week, officially signed the order to withdraw all 2,000 U.S. troops from Syria on Sunday. The president directed the Pentagon on Friday to cut the number of troops in Afghanistan from 14,000 to 7,000. So is it really time to be making these big moves, or are we setting ourselves up for some unforeseen consequences? Joining me now, Iraq combat veteran and KFI AM 640 radio host Brian Suits is back. Brian, tell me how this is really working.
Well, it is precipitous, and what was most surprising about it was that the pre-planned Turkish assault into Syria has actually been delayed. Who knew, out of the blue, President Assad, the actual, internationally recognized leader of Syria, had a secret deal all along with the Syrian Kurds, and as we are leaving Manbij and the other parts of eastern Syria where we're still present, the Syrian army is occupying it, and no one is trading shots. There's no swords being crossed. So this is actually turning out to be a lot more rational than we ever thought it would be, because the Kurds never really did buy that we were going to stay. Like you said, I'm on the record 5 years ago saying, I don't get it. Why would we go into Syria? I understood the mission of kicking ISIS out of Iraq. That should have been the first thing. But if militant Shia wanted to kill militant Sunni and we didn't have to spend a dime, then call me Orville Redenbacher, because I didn't have a problem. But that's a walk-off home run for our foreign policy, but we got involved, and it was stupid. But once involved, we did a phenomenal job, a superb job on the cheap defeating ISIS. But I just don't want people thinking that you can't be an ally of the U.S. without getting thrown under the bus. The Kurds will survive. The Syrian Kurds.
It's not just the Kurds who are upset. The Kurds are on a very short death list that Turkey has. Israel is also upset by this, and I agree with you. We shouldn't have been there in the first place. But the most dangerous thing is to put more troops in harm's way when you have to go back and clean up an even bigger mess.
If we do, and the Kurds are not an amorphous, ginormous group, some banal single source. The Iraqi Kurds, the Peshmerga, are a far different deal than the YPG or the PKK in Turkey. Masoud Barzani, the leader of the Kurdish regional government, he would rather chew his own arm off than have dinner with a member of the YPG. It's not one thing.
No, there is a differentiation to be made there, but Erdogan is not making that differentiation. He wants to do away with all of them. But you say there is a difference, but they want a country. They want a Kurdistan. There's really not a Syria anymore. So what becomes of the Kurds, and what happens to Syria with the United States pulling out in this manner?
Yeah, the Kurds are the largest ethnicity on earth without their own country. But even if you put them all together, they would probably be at war the next morning. Because, like I say, the Kurdish regional government, the Barzani family that runs the Iraqi Kurds, they want nothing to do with the Turkish PKK. And that's the thing. Erdogan knows this. Erdogan knows that if there's a list of Kurds he wants to kill, it's the Kami Kurds in Turkey, then the YPG, their offspring, and then maybe down the road, the Iraqi Kurds. But those are not his problem. And in fact, when I was in Iraq, the Turkish army was fairly openly operating way up north, almost with the approval of the Iraqi Kurds. It's amazingly complex, far more complex than the average American or even the above average American can understand. That's why 5 years ago, you and I said, What happened?
I mean, but what happened? That's why we shouldn't be there in the first place. That's why, you look at the complexity and you look at the odd bedfellows and the strange alliances, and it's impossible to see a positive outcome for the United States. What does the resignation of James Mattis do to the Department of Defense and those in uniform currently?
He was an inspirational, transformational figure, a guy, a warrior, a guy who'd worn the uniform, which is really unusual in that position because, bureaucrats do great. Robert Gates was a great Secretary of Defense. That's why Mattis was so unusual. But, clearly his deep understanding of the region that we're talking about exceeded his president, and he had some of that annoying integrity still left. And so I think he did the right thing. What it means is that whoever the next Secretary of Defense is, don't try to be Mattis. Don't speak in one-liners. But Mattis was a different cat. Never been married, no family. He was a warrior monk, and we probably will not see his like again. All
right, Brian Suits, thank you so much.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas to you, too. And little Reagan Ladybug.
Thank you. Good morning, motivators. We're glad you joined us this morning. I know many of you wanted to sleep in. You probably had the day off, so thank you for joining us.
That's right. So it's been a great show, and we're going to be now bringing in Julie Grace Brufke, reporter with The Hill, to discuss the latest on the partial government shutdown. So, Julie Grace, good morning.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. Thanks for having us, talking about this with us. So what do you make of the House and Senate kind of back in session a little bit, and where is this all going?
So it looks like both sides are just kind of digging in right now. I don't see a deal getting done before the House flips back to Democrats come January 3rd. I know that the White House had offered $2.1 billion, and Chuck Schumer had shot that down, and it looks like they're not going past the 1.3 that they brought to the table for border security. So I think we're just kind of at a stalemate right now as negotiations continue.
So let me ask you just, what do you think? Do you think the president's going to stick this out and get the $5 billion, or do you have any prognostication you want to do on that for us?
Well, I think especially with Democrats taking back the House, the chances of him getting his full $5 billion are low, and especially when Nancy Pelosi has the gavel, who wants lower than the $1.3 billion come January. I don't see how he gets his full $5 billion unless he's getting it through agencies and not allocated through Congress.
So what is a lot of the conservatives are upset that this didn't happen in 2 years. We looked at it as a do-nothing Congress, that Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan did not support the president, that fought him every step of the way, and it ended up going down to the 24th hour of the last day before Christmas, before they took their Christmas break. So what do you think the ramifications are going to be to conservatives if this doesn't happen, particularly President Trump in 2020?
No, I think it's definitely going to be a campaign problem for conservatives come 2020. But I think they did. They ultimately did bring up the bill which passed the House with the $5 billion that wasn't brought up in the Senate since it didn't have the votes. So I think they've kind of done all they could at this point to get the $5 billion at the 11th hour. But it's just kind of right now, I don't see a viable path for that at the moment.
So, Julie Grace, another question regarding the reality we're facing right now with the partial government shutdown. Now, I've been here in this town since '88. I started out as a very young GS-9 working in an Air Force intelligence, and from '88 on, I suffered, I don't know if suffered's the right word, I went through a number of shutdowns. And as I recall, because at least at my job, I was emergency essential, I always got paid. So what's the reality here for the civil? We're talking right now to folks on their way into commuting into their government jobs. What do you really think is going to happen here to them?
No, I've talked to some conservatives who say that it's going to be a long one. Anything's possible in Trump's America. So, they could come to a consensus. He could end up striking a deal last minute. I think eventually, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up at the 1.6, so they had a few months back if there's no restrictions on it. I've heard that the White House has been open to that. So I think maybe if they can come together on something along those lines, then we'll see the government reopen in a week or so. I
think that's the issue, though. I it seems to me President Trump's not going to cave. I mean, just the way I'm reading this, and I'm talking to the guys who talk to him, and I don't think he's going to back down.
From the conservatives I've talked to, I think they're definitely encouraging him to stick to his guns on that. I mean, at some point, they're going to have to reopen the government. So from White House sources I've talked to, I mean, they definitely want more than the 1.3 the Democrats are bringing forward. But eventually they're going to have to strike a deal.
Well, even if they're striking a deal, the biggest problem going to be for President Trump is this is being compared to George H.W. Bush's read my lips, no new taxes. And when he flipped on that, people like my father, who are a diehard conservative, ended up voting for Ross Perot. This will not help him in 2020. Even though these supposed conservatives in the House got this authorization done before Christmas, what did they do for the 2 years? So, end of the day, President Trump will be held accountable, whether it be by his own party or by the Democrats, on one way or another. I'm nervous that if he does acquiesce, that is going to cause a collapse within his own party. He's not going to have the support that he looks for.
I definitely think it's going to be a problem with his base come 2020 should they not figure something out where he doesn't get his wall. I think it's going to be problematic. I think if you just look at social media now, it's already becoming problematic. So it'll be interesting to see how they can kind of spin that moving forward. But the immigration talks going on all year were stalled over the DACA portions and the E-Verify, and then kind of the 11th hour when it was brought back up with border security after they pushed it back. It was just it's with losing the House
right.
that really kind of they're kind of backed into a corner at this point.
Well, a very quick question. I really want to just touch on this. He has military options. I'm a military guy, gunnery sergeant. Is here with me talking about this. There's something called the Army Civil, the Civil Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers. How do you think the Hill would react to him saying, "I'm just going to do this as a military option"?
I mean, I think you definitely see some strong pushback from Democrats. Whether conservatives would back that, and kind of from a big government standpoint of the balance of the different branches, whether they would take well to that, I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to some more members, but I definitely think he'd see some backlash from Democrats up on the Hill.
That'd be a great question to ask. Well, Julie Grace Brefke, thank you so much for being on with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And now it's now 8:43 on WMAL.